Everyone, so just a few words on today's historic event, um, the second inauguration of Donald Trump. Before I get into this and my thoughts on it, my thoughts on his inaugural address, because there's always a lot of analysis of that. Just a few interesting facts from previous inaugurations. Back in, I believe it was 1841, if I've got that right, the ninth President of the United States, William Henry Harrison, had actually contracted pneumonia because he'd been out. It was cold weather then as now, and he contracted pneumonia and died just over a month later, thus becoming the shortest serving president. Harrison had been a military veteran. I guess he was trying to show how tough he was, or his campaign slogan was Tippecanoe and Harrison too, I believe, was he'd been a veteran of the Battle of Tippecanoe. Yeah, that was an unfortunate turn of events. In 1908, if I've got this date right, William Howard Taft came to his inauguration in a stagecoach. It was very cold weather that year. There's images of a bit of a snowstorm, bitterly cold snowstorm. I think the first inauguration to be photographed was Benjamin Harrison in 1885, if I've got that correct. No, 1881, 1885 was the first term of Grover Cleveland. Cleveland, of course, is the other president, Grover Cleveland, along with Trump, who's had two non-consecutive terms. But I would argue Cleveland was a man of far more integrity than the incumbent. Um, then we go to 1953. Dwight D. Eisenhower, unusual thing in his inauguration, where a sort of cowboy star of the era lassoed him. And this was something that the president himself was in on. It was rather a bizarre scene. I've never seen that before until yesterday. John F. Kennedy, 1961, the last president to go into an inauguration with a top hat. Quite unusual and archaic looking for 1961. And Eisenhower wore a top hat on that occasion as well. 1985, January 1985, Reagan's second inauguration was also held in the Capitol Rotunda building. Very cold weather that year. I think the day was a bit deceptive. I've just checked. Washington D.C. is -3, but looks sunny. It didn't look that cold, but apparently it was Trump's own decision to move it indoors. Um, but yeah, much smaller crowd for that reason, about 600 people in the Capitol Rotunda, presumably mostly senators, Congress people. There was the usual protocol of former presidents, now former President Biden, Obama, Bush, Clinton, Vice President Harris was there. Nancy Pelosi didn't show up. Michelle Obama didn't show up. In the case of Pelosi, to be fair, this is a woman who had had her life threatened by the January the 6th rioters and whose husband was violently attacked. So honestly, I don't judge that at all. Um, and the Democrats today showed that they were in keeping with the constitutional etiquette of actually being there, something that Donald Trump did not afford to Joe Biden 4 years ago. Um, some of the procedure was obviously a bit different because of the change of location. Both men met at the White House, who left together. The two first ladies left together. Dr. Joe Biden and Melania Trump left together. Um, Now, the speech, it was typical Trump. It was certainly not a great inaugural address by any means. It was pretty awful in all honesty. It was deeply partisan. Um, Uplifting, I guess, in the sense of that Trumpian bombast about making America great again. But I really thought it was quite lightweight. It really wasn't an inspiring inaugural address. Um, I mean, the point about an inaugural address is yes, you acknowledge challenges. Yes, you provide a vision for the future. But Trump made it just about the culture wars. Now, I happen to agree with some of it. I have an issue with some of the trans dogma around, gender pronouns, that sort of thing. But really, I think a president of the United States should rise a bit above that stuff. I'm not saying he can't have an opinion on it, but is that really something to be bringing into a presidential inaugural address? He's speaking about giving immunity for military veterans who refused the COVID vaccine, but surely by refusing it, they were putting their comrades in danger. Um, Biden, incidentally, has pardoned members of his family, not because they've done anything wrong, but in anticipation that Trump might go after them. He's had to pardon Dr. Fauci, I assume, for the same reason. Um, there was relative civility between the two men. You know, Trump used this as an opportunity to attack the previous administration. Again, that just isn't something that's done. Now, the nature of democracy is different parties are going to have different views on things, and Biden's presidency will be assessed. I'll be making a video on that. Um, I think I'll just say this right now. I think history will be quite kind to Biden. He did make some big mistakes, but I honestly think with the challenges that he faced, I think history will be kind to him. But that's not so much for this video. I'll come back to that. Trump was talking about, it was a contradictory speech. He spoke about light shining all over the world and being a peacemaker. Yet he's simultaneously in the same speech effectively threatening Panama. Didn't mention Greenland, didn't mention that issue, but I just thought it was typical Trump. And honestly, it felt more like a State of the Union, partisan State of the Union address than a presidential inaugural address. I wasn't impressed by it. There were a few things I kind of agree with. I mean, I do think cartels. I have no problem with an American president designating them a terrorist group because they're vicious killers. Okay, so I've never been someone who said absolutely everything Trump says is wrong. If I was living in Texas or New Mexico and I felt that there was cartel members within the community, I'd want something to be done about it. So I have never taken issue with Trump for going after cartel members. But again, this is cherry picking. It's all very well talking tough on that, but what about America's chronic problem of gun violence? You could be absolutely sure Trump will do nothing about it except pay lip service to the NRA. You know, when there's mass shootings, he'll say how awful it is and just evade the issue, as most Republican presidents do, but Trump particularly. Um, he spoke about bringing peace to Ukraine on day one. Well, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the first full day of Trump's second term. Let's see if he brings peace to Ukraine tomorrow. Because that will be yet another piece of Trump being bombasted is just nonsense. Um, he's taking credit for the hostage deal in the Holy Land, but I think the Biden administration deserves credit for that as well. I mean, it may be that there was diplomacy going on behind the scenes that Trump deserved some credit for, but I think, Biden's the sitting president. It reminds me a little bit of literally the last few hours of Jimmy Carter's presidency. Carter got a lot of heat for the Iranian hostage crisis, but Reagan done a rather shady deal with the Iranians to kind of time the release of those hostages on the very hour that he was inaugurated. It was quite cynical, I think. Evidence has emerged to show that that was actually a behind the scenes thing to basically make Reagan look good and to make Carter look weak. I think Trump's doing a similar thing now, trying to make Biden look weak by, taking credit for the hostage thing. I mean, it's great news. I'm very pleased for those hostages to finally be getting the freedom, and I really, really hope that it can mean some peace for the region. Um, but it's going to take years to rebuild Gaza. Um, Muslim Americans who voted for Trump because they think, they were angry with Biden and Harris for their stance regarding support to Israel. I think they've shot themselves in the foot because Trump's going to be even more pro-Israel. Um, but I just thought it was a very partisan speech. It wasn't. There were some points I agreed with, but it wasn't presidential. It was full of bombast, egoism. I mean, making a reference to the fact he was shot. Reagan didn't do that in his second inaugural. Um, I'll double check that. As far as I know, he didn't. If he did, I stand corrected. But Reagan was shot in 1981. He didn't. He spoke about it in interviews, but he didn't always make it a campaign thing the way Trump has. Uh, the Reverend Franklin Graham absurdly claimed that God spared Trump's life for his purpose. Well, the problem with that sort of thinking is you could argue anyone who's a victim of violence has somehow been spared. So Putin, by the same logic, has been spared. Putin's had assassination attempts, so it's an absurd way of thinking. Um, but yeah, I thought it was hyper partisan. It was more like a partisan State of the Union than an inaugural. I wasn't impressed by it. But we'll see what happens in the next 4 years. He might do some good things. Um, I really do think that I do think Trump is appalling in many ways. I mean, for him to be just making up just coming out with these statements about Greenland, and just basically inciting animosity with allied nations is just, it's pathetic. And I think it takes America's eye off the ball, actually, in other challenges. But the culture war stuff, again, I don't disagree with Trump on everything there, but why should that really be something in an inaugural address? I don't know. I'm not convinced about that. What else is there to say, really? JD Vance, of course, is sworn in as well. He's one of the youngest vice presidents ever. Not the youngest, I think. The name eludes me now, but I think in the late 19th century there was a younger vice president. But certainly Vance is one of the youngest. There isn't really much more to say. Western countries, the world will have to work with Donald Trump. That goes without saying. But I do believe there's a difference between working with him because he's the American president versus being sycophantic. Now, the British right, I believe, just want us to be sycophantic to Trump. Farage, Badenoch, they're really, putting out that sort of narrative. I think we should take more of an approach like Schultz and Macron when Trump threatened European sovereignty. We should stand with our European allies. This idea of Trump basically threatening Danish sovereignty, if that escalates, I don't see a situation where America's going to invade Greenland, but we should be back in the Danes, absolutely. We need to work with America. That does not mean that the special relationship translates as being sycophantic. That's not a respectful relationship. Um, the trade tariffs is going to be a big thing. One of the most absurd things I thought in the speech was um, we're going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Now, that's again, it's just wasting time. What It's not really a pressing issue for struggling Americans to rename the Gulf of Mexico. I think it's just a way of sending out a message to the new Mexican president, um, Claudia Sheinbaum. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to because we can. But she did point to an older map that actually showed the current United States as, I think the term is Americas Mexicanos. Um, I just don't see the point of this sort of situation. The thing with the cartels is different. That is an inherent threat to American citizens. But you put up that wall completely as Trump wants to do. Look at what happened recently. The Mexican Fire Service was in Los Angeles aiding their neighbor. You put up the wall, it's going to prevent that sort of international cooperation. Um, drill, 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 baby. Trump just completely wants to trash any green initiatives whatsoever. I do believe that American jobs, it's important for an American president to secure that. But at the same time, I think that when you are one of the world's biggest carbon emitters, there is a responsibility there. It's not about being woke. It's not about, going along with the dystopian narrative of Greta Thunberg. But I think there is responsibility there. Um, I wasn't at all surprised with some of the stuff Trump was coming out with today. It was typical Trump. But there'll be people cheering it and saying they love the bombast, make America great again. There are a lot of things, frankly, that America lags behind in, and not because of Joe Biden, because of successive governments. To be fair to the Democrats, I think they have done more than the Republicans have to try to address some of these things. The fact that millions of Americans don't have access to healthcare insurance, the fact that American school children run the risk of being shot going to class. These are things that don't happen in European countries, not in the same level. This is not to say that Europe doesn't have problems, we do, but this American exceptionalism, and it has to be said, Democrat presidents are also quite arrogant about this. It's America's the most powerful country in the world. Is it the greatest country in the world? I'm not so sure that it is. Because when you look at some of the social problems that America has, when you look at the tinderbox sensitivity around race, when you look at the fact that so many Americans basically have to suffer because they can't afford healthcare costs. I just don't understand how that could be deemed to be great in its in of itself. There are some areas America's a great country. There's aspects of American culture I really like. It's the most powerful country in the world. I would much rather have American hegemony than Chinese hegemony, right? But that sort of bombast, it's just a lot of the world looks at that and thinks, yeah, not quite. There's, if you look at the education system, a lot of American children are at a disadvantage compared to their counterparts in Finland or Denmark. It's I don't know. I just think the American exceptionalism strikes me as pretty arrogant. Another thing Trump was talking about expanding our territory. That's basically using an imperialistic language. Sort of, you'd have to go back 120 years to the first Roosevelt administration for that sort of Henry Roosevelt administrations for that sort of narrative. What does that mean? Is he talking about Greenland? I don't know. But why start a feud with a NATO country? It's a waste of time. Um, I hope that there's successes in the next 4 years. If Trump stands up to China, that's a good thing. I think the thug regime in Beijing should be stood up to. I do not trust Donald Trump when it comes to Russia because his record is inconsistent. Maybe he will stand up to Putin. We'll see. But the fact of the matter is, he's been inconsistent. Donald Trump shamefully said that was a genius move by Putin the day he invaded Ukraine. And maybe he could do whatever the hell he likes. Now, those debates within NATO members, to publicly trash your allies in that way, it's just despicable. Also, the only time that Article 5 has been invoked was after September 11th, something Donald Trump, as a New Yorker, should remember. The fact that it was other NATO members that were standing up for America at that time. There isn't a lot more to say. I think there's going to be an inaugural ball at a big arena in DC. There usually is. Um, but I do think a lot of Trump voters are going to be in for a surprise. They're going to find that he will not be able to do everything he's promising. He just won't, because some of it is ridiculous. For example, deporting 11 million people is not practically possible. It just cannot happen. I have no problem with criminals being deported. But really, if you've had someone who, let's say, has been in the community for 10 years and technically they broke the law because they came in illegally, but let's say they have children in a local school and they're not dangerous criminals, they're not cartel members, um, is it really the priority to deport those people? I don't think so. I've no, I think deporting cartel members makes sense. They are an existential threat to the United States, so I've no issue with that. But I just think that some of the things Trump's promising is ridiculous, and people are going to be let down. He said, "No president in 250 years has had the challenges that I've had." Um, FDR, Lincoln, has he really had those challenges? And as for the assassination attempt, four previous presidents have actually been killed. That puts things in context. I'm going to wrap this up, but we'll see what happens in the next 4 years.